Seeing a presence of a quorum and calling to order this meeting of the Regional School Committee on October 26th at 6:30 p.m. on the dot. So we'll start with a roll call attendance. When I call your name, please state present. Mr. Demling?
Demling present.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington present.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny present.
Ms. Lord?
Lord present.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer present.
Mr. Stammel?
Stammel present.
Ms. Stancer?
Stancer present.
And next item tonight is the approval of our minutes from October 12th, which was our last meeting. Welcome, Mr. Sullivan. If you're for committee members, you need to be logged in to Board Docs in order to be able to read the draft minutes. Any edits or motion? Mr. Demling?
Yeah, I just want to say again what excellent minutes these are, and I really love the timestamp on the video. Really helpful. And like maybe building on that, and I don't know how much work this is going forward, so it doesn't have to be for these minutes. But like when you're playing a YouTube video, which these meetings get saved on for Amherst Media, if you right click, you can save the URL at that timestamp, right? So we could potentially put that link into these minutes if they're electronic documents. I'm skipping over a few potential technical obstacles with that, but it's just something to explore. But I loved the timestamp in there. It made it really accessible, I thought.
Any other edits?
Second.
Moved by McDonald, second by Spitzer. We'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny, aye.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, aye.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
Mr. Stammel?
Stammel aye.
Ms. Stancer?
Stancer, aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Sullivan aye.
And McDonald, aye. The motion passes unanimously. Next up, we have public comment, and we have just one, and that is attached to the agenda item, but I will display it. And just as a reminder, we accept public comment by email or voicemail anytime up until 3 p.m. on the day of our meetings. Earlier, Ms. Spitzer had asked if we could make it more, the instructions on how to submit public comment to the forefront. So I did add it on that header of the meeting description. So hopefully that will be easier for community members to find and understand how to submit public comment. Now we'll move on to next up is Superintendent's update. And for that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Morse.
Thank you. So a couple things on the topic of websites and all that. I want to say that our team has rolled out kind of a beta version of the new ARPS website. If you go to www.arps.org, you'll see a different interface. It's a work in progress, much like Board Docs. We're continuing to make improvements. We don't want to wait till we think it's perfect to roll it out, because we think both Board Docs and the new website are huge improvements of the way we used to do school committee meetings and the former website. So feedback, suggestions are welcome. There was a time period where we couldn't update the website when the transition was happening. That has now ended. So we will be updating the website more regularly now. But thanks to Jerry Champagne and Sasha Figueroa, who did a lot of work actually on both of those projects. Next Tuesday is Election Day. And for us in the schools, that means it's Curriculum Day. I think the school committee received information, I think today, from David Westmoreland about our programs. Really amazing and numerous set of professional development, all in the focus of diversity, equity, inclusion. Dr. Cornell West is our keynote speaker, which I think I don't have to do an introduction for him. I assume many people know who he is. So we're really excited about Dr. West. About 20 years ago, I saw him speak at when he was in Amherst. I'm sure he's been here in between, but it was very formative at that point when I was first making the transition to go into education. So I'm really excited to have him back, and a number of workshops done by some outside presenters, some former retired educators, as well as some current educators in our district. So really looking forward to that day. Today, the Department of Education and Commissioner Riley came out that the universal mask mandate across the Commonwealth is extended until January 15th. There is a way where if schools are beyond 80% vaccinated of all individual students and staff members, they can apply for a waiver for that. At this point, I think only one district has fully planned to do a 3-week trial starting next week on that. At this point, the public health director who advises me does not feel like this is the wise time to move forward with exploring something like that, given the more indoor time as well as holiday season. I think that being said, I think a future conversation for the committee and myself may be, what time. It's not going to be indefinite. We're not all wearing masks, forever in our schools, and to have that conversation, particularly at the regional level where the vaccine has been accessible. There's a vaccine mandate that is 5 weeks away, and so I do think that's a good conversation to have, but it's nothing that we're rushing to do, and the state has that. I think also worth noting is that that indoor or school universal mask mandate extends to athletics as well through January 15th, because that was a question I'm receiving a lot, as indoor season is not very far away for those student athletes who are interested in participating. Staying on this theme, on Friday is the first of our next series or new series of vaccine clinics. It's going to be at the middle school in the auxiliary gym upstairs. That's accessible for all students 12 plus, as well as staff members or adults in our system who are looking to either get vaccinated or get a booster. The follow-up is 3 weeks later to the day, which I think is the 19th or so of November. So thanks to the town of Amherst Health Department for putting that on. And there's been some good initial numbers of participation in that clinic. It's much like we did last year. There's sometimes during the school day and sometimes after school to accommodate people with, eliminate barriers to participation and access. Congratulations to our middle school cross country team. Our boys and girls won the Western Mass State Championship. We talk much more about high school athletics. I think it's covered a lot more in the local media, but that portends well for our high school teams. The fact that both teams won by sizable margins the Western Mass Championship. So kudos to those students in our middle school. Our MSAN program, typically around this time of year, we talk about MSAN retreat. We're annual trip where MSAN students, Minority Student Achievement Network students, take a trip, and they participate in an amazing conference that is not possible given the status of COVID at this time. What they are doing and what MSAN has put together is a series of 7 sessions virtual sessions for all MSAN scholars across the country. It involves things like Dr. Bettina Love, who's our keynote speaker a couple of years ago, exploring community organizing, housing and gentrification, body positivity and health, collectivism and collaboration, and intersectional social justice, collaborative equity. And they still are intended to come up with an equity action plan, much like the scholars have in the past. It's not going to happen over a multi-day conference. It happens throughout the year, ending in April. So when we get to April, I'll be asking the MSAN scholars on your behalf to come and share their action plan with us, as we have done in the years past. But thanks to Mary Custard and others who have been so central, Gloria Davis, in the MSAN course and then supporting our students. 2 other quick ones. Middle school, for the first time in a while, there's kind of a robust election that happened for middle school student council. So this is an attempt by staff to involve middle school students in more decision making at the middle school level, which I think is fabulous. And I think they're at a great age to start engaging in student government that way. So I know Mick O'Connor and Mika McGee were really supporting that effort, and glad to see that happening. Finally, With some of our UMass partners, we working with them on something called the Happiness Project. It was grant funded, not our grant, but they got a grant to do this, and they screened 78% of the middle school students. Right, it wasn't a requirement, but it was an encouraged activity about their well-being. There was room for growth and happiness, which is the way that the research is framed. And about 27% of the students screened, and they've been invited to participate in the intervention with the goal of increasing their well-being. So the recruitment is about 87 students asked, and we're hoping for about a 50% response rate. We're getting pretty close to that. And the intervention, and I think it's worth noting that it's not just UMass folks, that 3 middle school staff members are certified in well-being promotion programs. So Luz Gomba, Delinda Dykes, who are counselors, and Hector Santos, another counselor, completed a 24-hour training to be certified in this program. And so it's really trying to look at the well-being of our middle school students. We know can be a challenging age as it relates to well-being, just developmentally, where students are. In addition, it's the age level that's sort of had that pre-adolescent, adolescent time affected perhaps more significantly than other age groups by the pandemic. So really appreciative of our UMass partners and our staff for getting involved in this. And that is my update for this evening.
Mr. Stammel.
I'm just not familiar with MSCAM. Is it a high achieving minority students? They reach a certain achievement level, or?
Sure. So MSAN is I'm sorry about that. I'm reminded in these moments that often I make assumptions because I go to meetings for years, but some of the cast of characters changes, right? So MSAN is a Minority Student Achievement Network. It's a network of I think between 20 and 30 districts across the country who are high achieving districts that don't have the stereotypical suburban demographics to them. I think that even that's changed over time. What's stereotypical is shifted, but have high numbers of students of color in those districts. It was formed over 20 years ago, the 20th anniversary. I went to that celebration a couple of years ago, and it was really formed because these districts often look great in the aggregate. When you look at achievement numbers, and when you disaggregate, you notice trends that districts wanted to take on. So it's a lot of districts like us, Princeton, New Jersey, places that are in college towns, where Northwestern is. I'm blanking on the town's name right now. I apologize, in Illinois. But then other districts, as suburbs have become more and more racially, ethnically diverse, it's actually a growing number of school districts that have joined the network. So for us, there's a lengthy kind of process to be an MSAN scholar, and there's an MSAN related course, academic course that's taught in the social studies department. So I think Mr. Samuel, I can follow up with you offline, but I actually think because of COVID, we've sort of haven't had as much connection to the students. There was more typically they'd come every fall after their conference, they'd share how they got to be there, what they learned at the conference, and their action plan. We haven't done that in a while, just because there hasn't been the same kind of programming. So let me do some thinking with the high school team about perhaps not waiting till spring, but trying to even a mini presentation from either Mary or some of the students would be really helpful to kind of reinvigorate that public focus on it. Thank you for asking the question. My apologies for not being clear.
Yeah, thanks.
Mr. Demling.
So the well-being programs that you described sound really interesting, given like what a priority we've all expressed that is in the return from COVID. Could you give some specific, if some specific examples of what that looks like? Like what kind of support or services or interventions are offered, and how does that look from a student's point of view?
You're muted.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a lengthy answer. I wonder, I bet you that our UMass partner or some of our middle school staff, I don't want to add items to future agendas willy-nilly, but I actually think you're right that this is something that we're talking a lot about this year. It's a good example of an innovative approach that's being worked on here. And I wonder when we get to upcoming agenda items, if we could ask Dr. Pfeffer, who's our kind of lead at UMass, as well as some of the middle school staff members, to talk about it, because I think they'll do a much better job than I can do the summary piece. I think they would dig in on some of the content that might be more relevant and helpful for you, if that's okay with you, Mr. Demling, and the committee.
Yeah, that sounds great. to me.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Because I had just a couple of questions. Was it just the middle school that is participating right now?
It's the whole program is and grant is focused on the kind of that age group, that
Mhm,
age span. Yeah.
mhm. And approximately what proportion of the student population at ARMS participated in the screening? Because you talked about a proportion of those that were screened.
Yeah.
How many were screened?
78% of students were
Okay.
screened, and out of those percent, that's a lot of students who, in the words of the researcher, have room for growth in the terms of their well-being and happiness. And so, yeah, I'm gonna make sure I put this on, a future agenda item and try to work it out where I think to hear directly from the researcher as well as the practitioners would be helpful in terms of design of the intervention, the program, and where the research came from that was driving it.
Yeah. Any other questions on the update from the superintendent? Seeing none, we'll move on. Next up is chair's update. I don't have an update other than for committee members, we talked about having the executive session first. We moved it to the end. I'm sure you noticed that already, but that's our only sort of change in the agenda order tonight. And with that, I'll move on to school committee announcements. And Ms. Stancer.
I just wanted to report back about the most recent Budget and Finance Subcommittee meeting. We talked about three things. One is the budget FAQ, and Dr. Slaughter is working on that. We hope to have a draft for the whole committee at our November 9th meeting for people to review. The subcommittee will have a chance to look at it beforehand. Let's see. We talked about 4 town meetings and came up with sort of a tentative plan that the first meeting would be to talk about the mechanics of the assessment, not about money or anything, but just how the assessment might happen. And the dates I'm going to give you are tentative dates, would be Saturday, the 20th of November. The second meeting would be early December, probably the 11th. And that would be projections on the state aid, sort of the first go on projections, and the 22-23 budget. And the third would be the traditional deciding the assessment method meeting, and that date hasn't been determined yet. And then we talked about public forum, tentatively picked the date of November 16th. We hope to provide the information about the FAQ when we announce that. And so people will have a chance to see that before the presentation. And think that the forum will take the form of having 1 or 2 very brief presentations at the beginning to provide context for people. And the in-person versus virtual, we haven't decided that yet. So that is still to be determined. So that's it.
Mr. Stammel.
So Margaret, these meetings, are they all school committee members from all the towns are invited or highly recommended to attend? Or is this something that I should report to my school committee that is happening and it behooves us to attend?
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Believe so.
I think you could give them the dates, but indicate that they are tentative at this, people should save them, but
Right.
they're not 100% certain. So,
And
yeah.
the other thing was the November 20th, you said it will be about mechanics.
Yes.
What does that mean? I'd have to explain it to my committee.
Well, Dr. Slaughter could do that better than I think it would be talking about things like 5-year average, the 5-year average, the statutory versus the agreement. Sorry, I think that that's the kind of thing when we're not talking about the actual money.
So just sort of an intro to
Yes.
everything that is going to happen.
Well,
Or
I
going to be
guess so. I might have Dr. Slaughter send you an email.
Yeah, could you?
Yes, I will, because I think he can describe it better than I can.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And just for clarification, I think when you talk about mechanics, Ms. Stancer, you're talking about the mechanics of the assessment method, not the budget. I mean, it's part of the budget, obviously, but the mechanics of the assessment. Is that correct?
That's correct. Not to talk about the actual budget. That would come at the second meeting.
Great. Any other questions? I'll update the budget policy subcommittee. Also met last week, and we added an agenda item to tonight's meeting that will go through there. But just wanted to alert folks that we met. We are meeting on a roughly monthly basis, and all of the dates of future meetings can be found if you go to library and general information. There's information on the subcommittees, and just bear with us, it's still beta, but that's where you'll see all the future dates of policy subcommittee meetings. Any other announcements? Any other subcommittee updates? No. Okay. Then we'll move on to our new and continuing business. First up is our continuing and potential vote of the adding 6th grade to the middle school. So this is continuing our conversation from our last meeting. And I think and we all had a chance, I think, now to really dig into the report and materials that Dr. Morris shared with us right after that meeting. And just to remind ourselves, because it's so easy to get sort of lost in the decision making, because we all sit on elementary school committees as well as this committee, and just sort of remind ourselves to wear our hats of regional school district members as opposed to our elementary district. And on the question that we're deciding tonight is whether from the perspective of the 7th and 8th graders currently in the middle school and the program at the middle school, do we want to add 6th grade into that, regardless of what individual town elementary committees decide? So we're on the receiving end in this decision as opposed to the sending end. And Dr. Morris, did you want to share any updates?
Yeah, so I think there's 3 things I'd like to share. I'll try to be brief. One is that Leverett, the meeting for whatever reason couldn't happen earlier in the month, but tomorrow night I'll be with Mr. Stammel and his colleagues on the Leverett School Committee, just talking about their 6th grade questions from the Leverett Elementary School perspective. Second thing I'd like to share is that I was at the Pelham School Committee last week, and I'll try to summarize some of the implications. Ms. Kenny and Ms. Stancer can certainly correct me where I go astray, but it was a good conversation. I think I went in recommending very much a wait and see approach. The feedback I got from the committee was a key issue they would like to talk about sooner as opposed to later was if Pelham was to send it 6th grade, what would the model be? Because they're not regional school students. So at least in theory right now, sending 6th grade students to the middle school would be transposing the 6th grade teacher to a different building, but it wouldn't necessarily be integrated in Amherst, or at least it's not obvious that it would be. So I think what I heard from the will of the committee is to really dig into that issue, that core issue of if Pelham sent it 6th grade, what would the model look like? Not in the specifics of is there world language and all those pieces, but really functionally, would it be working together with Amherst if the region does move forward with the vote tonight, or do something very different? So that's something that the feedback, my notes indicate we're going to continue to talk about in Pelham over the next couple months, is kind of what could a model look like, and would it be a sort of singleton model, or would it potentially be more integrated with other districts who choose to join? And I think there was an interest in having that conversation, not waiting a year to have that conversation, but doing that over the course of this academic year. Ms. Dancer, Ms. And I think the last thing I want to say is I don't have much more to say than I said last time. So I'll be, again, very brief on this point, but from the regional perspective, I don't see a tremendous amount of downside or really much downside at all. I think from an upside perspective, there will be some rental agreements. So financially, there would be some incentive for the region to have sixth grade students to come to the middle school. I think there's potential to have the economy of scale benefits in terms of like not just makerspace, which we talked about last time, but other elective offerings that, as the middle school shrinks, gets kind of hard to maintain. And so I think there's some residual benefit educationally for 7th and 8th graders. There's plenty of space. I think when we did an MSBA space analysis, there's space for many, many more students than we would be including even if all 4 towns sent their 6th graders here. And I think there's some potential benefit, again, to reinvigorate the middle school, to have some middle school is a great place. Our staff do a fantastic job, but they've been saying for a long time that, maybe there's an external stimulus that, or some staff, I shouldn't say they. I've heard that, having 3 years with at least some students could really be a benefit to the school community, to have at least many of the students spending 3 years at the site. Many of the families spending 3 years at the site would be something that we heard when we visited Northampton as part of the prior study that was done. So, bluntly, I don't see a lot of downside. I think it's a much larger change for the elementary committees to consider than it is for the regional committee. I think those of you who have seen me at the elementary committees, I'm a lot more chatty at those meetings on this topic than I am at the regional committee, because I think the impact is lower and generally it's just positive. I don't see it having I don't see a lot of downside. If it's okay to comment on that, I think at the Pelham committee, we did have, wearing another hat, but we did have a conversation, and because I started that conversation, I think I should own it, which is that, Amherst Elementary School Committee has a timeline that they voted. I think for the other towns, one of the concerns I heard in Pelham was, if the timelines don't match up, is there an on-ramp later? In other words, is there some capacity for towns to say, we're interested, but we don't want to we don't want the timeline to be necessarily dictated to us. We have different scenarios, we have different financial situations, and I think not having the door closed on September 1st, 2023 felt really important to our friends in Pelham. So I think that's probably true, although I don't have evidence of that. In Leverett and Shutesbury, I've heard it anecdotally that just having a little more flexibility of when elementary districts might make decisions or might be interested in potentially sending students might be something that the region might want to consider. So that's what I have to share. I'm happy to answer any questions. And Ms. Dancer, Ms. Kenny, if I misrepresented anything in Pelham, please let me know.
Any comments, thoughts, questions? Mr. Sullivan?
Yeah, I have a question. We haven't had an update in quite a while on the staff and administration at the middle school. Are all our administrators now licensed in the proper area that they're working? Because I know that when we hired one, they were not, and I haven't heard since then whether they've become licensed in the right area or not.
Yes, the answer is they're all licensed in the correct assistant principal license that Massachusetts has. Yep. And I'm sorry, I probably haven't looped back to that topic enough, but we're in good shape there.
Mr. Stammel?
I think I basically understand when we talk about putting on your regional hat and not your elementary hat. But in this case, and that's usually true, but I've discussed this with a few people, and it's awfully hard to do that in this case, because being new, I'm trying to balance, well, I just say whatever I want here, and it's my opinion, and representing Leverett. So that's why when we vote, I'm going to abstain. Just, I just can't. It's hard to totally separate the two roles for me. And after discussing it That's just so you know.
Mr. Demling.
Yeah, I mean, I'll plus one Mr. Stamel's observation that it is often hard to separate the two. And I've been doing this almost 5 years, and it doesn't. It gets a little easier, I guess, but but we are a funky structured district, and then there's really no ultimately getting away from that. Yeah, so I mean, just for myself, I said most of this last time, but since when we make these big, I always say this too, but when we make these big decisions, most of the conversation happens in the prior meeting or two. So just in summary, I feel the same way from a regional perspective that I did last meeting. That I think that the middle school is a great school as it is, and primarily because we have great teachers and teachers that really know how to teach this particular age group. And I see this addition from a regional point of view as only enhancing that, not just for the specific potential benefits of economy of scale and whatnot that Dr. Morris mentioned, but we also talked last meeting about taking this on as an opportunity to refresh the vision of the middle school. It doesn't mean that great work isn't going on, but so often with educators, you have your head down, meeting the needs of student after student after student, and you don't often have the opportunity to pull back at the 50,000 foot level and say, how do we want to educate adolescent students and bring them from their elementary life to the secondary life? And I'm really excited about that opportunity. I think it will be really great, not just for the sixth graders, but for the 7th and 8th graders as well. So I certainly don't want to, Pelham. I'm happy to amend the motion with wording that allows for a more flexible on-ramp. I don't see any downside to that, and I totally respect whatever Leverett and Tewksbury want to do. And yeah, so I'm comfortable voting for it tonight.
Ms. Kenny.
I did go back through all the things, but I do have a couple of questions that if they're not answered tonight, then at the very least, I would like them to be thought about when moving forward. All right, let's see if I can read my own handwriting. All right, what will happen with the regional budget and the small town assessments? If there's more money coming into the region as a rental agreement, how will that play out? Not only for the regional budget, like for the regional budget, and then by adding potentially adding the 6th graders in, how will that specifically benefit the 7th and 8th graders? If there's other classes, like will there be more competition for the space? Will there be preferential treatment to kids who have already taken, so say the maker space, right? The new shop space. If there's, 6th graders that are taking that, and then, or how will those work? And then Dr. Morris touched on it before, the program development for the 6th graders at ARMS, if there's more than one town sending their kids. And then also, how will the sports work? Will there be more available? Will there be more teams? Will there be intramurals? And how will that look for our 7th graders? So
let me start. I may ask you to prompt me back to because I counted 4 questions, but I wasn't as quick to write all of them down. So in terms of the budget, whatever funds come in from whatever town sends students would supplement the regional budget. It wouldn't affect the regional assessment method unless you all decided to take this potential change to redo the regional agreement. That's not my decision. I see Steve getting really excited about doing that. great, great for Steve. But you know, it would come in as supplemental income the same way as when we rent space to any other agency that, you know, we rent space to. It comes in and supplements the regional budget. So it wouldn't be delineated by town. It wouldn't affect regional assessment methods, except it would have the net impact of benefiting the regional town's assessment. Athletics, I'm not going to go in order because I'm going to go in order which I remember, so I'll ask you to prompt me. Athletics, it's a really good one. Most middle schools that are 6 through 8, which again are most middle schools, allow for 6th grade students to participate in sports. We have a limited, but as I mentioned earlier in the update, very successful middle school sports program. I have talked about it with our athletic director, Ms. Stewart. You know, and I think we're all committed to trying to find more coaches and more staff if kids want to participate, because I think that is a benefit for students who are at the middle school to be able to participate, and it'd be very awkward for them not to be able to. It also brings in more funds. You know, I mean, sadly, our sports aren't free, but they also supplement our budget, our athletics budget, and the more students who want to participate, the better off we are. The third one that I remember, the fourth one I'm going to blank on, but the third one was about electives in space. You know, again, you know, compared, like if we were building this building new, it would, the kind of architect's design, it would be many more hundreds of students more than we have coming. So it's really about the how space is utilized more than it is about the capacity of space. So I think, you know, if there is an investment in the maker space, I'll use that one for example. That's not only designed for 6th grade, that's something that we would enhance the school. And it's something that would benefit our school if it was just 7th and 8th grade, but having the 6th grade it'll allow a space like that to be used throughout the day. And that's really the economy of scale benefit. Is if you do have, you know, upwards of 600 students as opposed to 400, it allows for fewer kind of part-time staff that way, and allows for a better kind of building usage, as opposed to we can use that 2 periods a day instead of let's use it 7 periods a day if we have a space that students would fill up that class 7 periods a day, because we just have that economy of scale. And the fourth question I am not remembering, so I apologize, Ms. Kenny. If could I apologize and ask you to repeat the fourth one?
So the fourth one was about the program development for the 6th graders when they're at ARMS, which you did touch on a little bit. It's like Mr. Stamel said, it's very hard to take off your sending town hat, right? So I think that's a big thing, right? Us little towns can easily get overrun by Amherst. Not that I think that is specifically happening, but it's right. You know, we have to think about our kids and what that will look like. So
sure. So yeah, I mean, I think it's not the most nuanced answer, but it is how I feel, which is right now we have 3 Amherst elementary schools that share a curriculum that have programs that don't exist in Pelham, Leverett, or Shutesbury. It exists right now, right? It'll continue to exist whether the 6th grade students are in Amherst elementary schools or they're in Amherst Regional Middle School. If this change doesn't happen, I wouldn't assume that 6th grade would stay the same for the Amherst elementary schools. It evolves, like the Comandantes program. So, you know, in Amherst, we're now up to 2nd grade, and next year we're thinking ahead 2 years. So we'll be at 4th grade with a dual language program that has 2 full classes, so about 40 students in it at every grade level. That doesn't exist in Leverett, Shutesbury, Pelham. I'm not saying it should or shouldn't, but it just right now it doesn't, and I've not heard plans for it to do that. And I think, you know, having the Amherst 6th grade students in a middle school building does allow for more perhaps opportunities for creative planning and program development, as you note. But our programs don't look exactly the same now. They'll continue to evolve whether the Amherst students are in the middle school or located in the Amherst elementary schools. We have, you know, for instance, and we've done a little bit of this at Pelham, but not at the same scale. We have a huge garden program in the Amherst elementary schools. We have a very, very lovely small scale program at Pelham Elementary School. I'm not sure if there's a full gardening program with curriculum, at Leverett and Shutesbury. Our garden coordinator is going to be testifying at the State House for what she's doing in the Amherst schools. There's wonderful things in Pelham. I could do the flip of not, so please don't get me wrong that I don't think there's great things happening in 6th grade in Pelham, and I know that there is in Leverett and Shutesbury. I think my larger point is that I don't know if the location of the building is going to be the thing that shifts the experience or the opportunities for Amherst versus other students. I think there's a lot more to that. I think they are in the building a year earlier in this scenario. I don't want to minimize that fact. But in terms of some of the kind of programming pieces, I just want to suggest that we don't have the same programming now. And I think we have significant differences, and that'll continue into the future.
Is it a follow-up, Ms. Kenny, or a new question? Okay, go ahead.
I think I should have been more clear. I think I was thinking more about if Amherst moves there and like one of the little towns goes, right? So how that would work. Not I know all of the towns are or whatever. The 6th grade is already different depending on what town you lived in. I didn't expect that to all of a sudden be different. It was more about if the 6th graders in Amherst are in the middle school, and then, Pelham 6th graders also decide to go to the middle school, because they're not under the regional umbrella, they're still part of their sending town umbrella. How will those 20 Pelham 6th graders be integrated into the larger Amherst 6th grade that is already happening in the middle school? It's when they're
I'm sorry, I misinterpreted. I understand what you're saying now. I'm going to give an equally unsatisfying answer as I did before, even though I understand the question. I think that'd be a conversation for the Amherst Elementary School Committee and the Pelham Elementary School Committee to discuss. I have thoughts on that. I think without going too far, I think there's lots of possibilities that if the towns and the school committees wanted to collaborate, we could think really creatively about. I'm not saying it should or shouldn't happen, but I don't think it, from my vantage point as superintendent, I think we could think creatively about that. And if each town wanted to say, no, we'd like to figure out how to do more integrated, kind of a 6th grade. I can't speak for the Amherst School Committee. As superintendent, I would be very open to that conversation. And I'm sorry for misinterpreting, giving a really long-winded answer that didn't connect at all to your question.
And I'll just remind folks, we have a quorum of that school committee here, and so we cannot talk about the Amherst 6th grade programming because it's not on the agenda and it's not a joint meeting. Mr. Stammel.
Yeah, I wonder if Pelham and Shutesbury are thinking the same way. One thought that we have, and it's an issue of concern, is that if we choose not to go to the 6th grade in Leverett, then families can apply for choice. They could choice their kids into the 6th grade in the middle school, I assume. Is that true?
That would be, this is going to be equally unsatisfying. That would be a decision of the Amherst School Committee, which is in quorum, but doesn't have a called for meeting tonight. So, I mean, I can answer it, but I think they can't jump in on their thoughts.
They can apply for choice.
The Amherst School Committee could open seats in 6th grade, or they could not open seats in 6th grade. But that's a decision for a body that can't respond at this moment.
Right. Just to throw out, it is a concern of ours. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Shutesbury, we're pretty stubborn and stuck in our ways, and we are sure enough with the way it's going now that we're not afraid of losing our 6th graders to Amherst at this point. Although if the sports teams and drama take off, then in 2 or 3 years I might be worried about it, but right now, no.
If I could just comment, I think the good thing is the full Amherst School Committee is hearing the concerns that are being expressed about choice in 6th grade, and perhaps at another meeting they could discuss that.
I think sort of bringing it back to the question, Ms. Kenny, that you posed about, so how does this benefit 7th and 8th graders? bringing it back to that, because that is what we can talk about. Having had two kids that went through middle school, I share Mr. Demling's rave reviews of the school. It's a phenomenal group of educators and phenomenal programming, and just really a gem in so many ways. And yet because it's only 2 years as a family, it's hard to build that connection and sort of feel sort of a part of a school community. It's not the high school, and yet there's the sports and some things, and they partner with high school in some ways, and participate in the teams, and yet there isn't sort of its own identity that lasts, because you spend half of your first year there learning the ropes and learning how things work, and then you spend the second half of your second year getting ready and thinking about high school and leaving. And so when you think about the role that our PGOs play in each of our individual elementary schools, it's really challenging at the middle school to get families to step up and serve in that way, because you don't know what's going on for the first half of the time, and then you're like, well, I'm leaving, so and so I do see that as a big benefit of sort of building that sort of family and caregiver support of the school community in partnership with the educators. And I think that can only benefit the 7th and 8th graders to know sort of to have that sort of consistent and strong community identity within the school building itself. So that's for me, that's my sort of how I think about it. Other thoughts? I thought I saw somebody's hand earlier. Was it? And also, there's some folks that haven't spoken. I don't know if you are interested in sort of sharing any thoughts, or if we're ready to move. Ms. Dancer.
I was going to say this when I vote, but I think now is the time. As one of the Pelham representatives to the region, if anyone from Pelham is listening to this meeting, I just want to be very clear that I am not tonight voting about moving Pelham 6th graders. What I am voting about tonight is whether I think it's a good idea for the middle school to allow 6th graders in. So please, if you're from Pelham and you hear me vote, understand I'm going to vote in Pelham the way the community wants me to vote. And that's not the vote that's happening for me tonight. So I just want to make that clear.
Mr. Demling?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about the motion and the request from Pelham, and I'm reading the motion language, and I'm wondering if we change in the fall of 2023 to on or after the fall of 2023, that would achieve the desired effect from the point of view of Pelham. I'm seeing a nod.
Thank you. Any folks that haven't yet spoken have any questions or comments? Mm-hmm. Okay. Then I will make a motion that we accept and support the vote of any of the 4 sending elementary school committees to opt to have their 6th grade students attend Amherst Regional Middle School beginning in or after the fall of 2023, with details on a space rental agreement to be resolved at a later date. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by McDonald and seconded by Spitzer, and we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Kenny?
So, like Margaret said, this is a very...
We can't do that.
Oh. Kenny. Kenny, no.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, aye.
Ms. Spitzer,
Spitzer, aye.
Mr. Stammel,
Stammel abstain.
Ms. Stancer,
Stancer, aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Sullivan, aye.
and McDonald, aye. The motion passes 7 yay, 1 no, and 1 abstain. Thank you. Next up, we have the superintendent goals for 2021 and 2022. And the updated version of the goals is attached with the rubric. I don't know what those are called. Categories, items.
Standards and elements, yeah.
Standards and elements. Thank you. Attached to each of the goals.
Yep, and I think the other two updates based on feedback from the committee is explicitly stating that restorative justice work that's happening this year is under goal number 2, and the other thing under goal number 2 was adding explicitly that there's longitudinal data, not just for this year, but longitudinal data in terms of hiring and diversity of staff were included. So there were a couple other feedback. Those were the two I was able to integrate based on what I heard from the committee last week, as well as Ms. McDonald said, adding the required rubric elements and the link to that document. So those are the key differences that you're seeing tonight as compared to the last time we discussed this matter.
Thank you. Any comments? Questions? Seeing none, I will move that we approve the goals for superintendent for the 2021-22 school year as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by McDonald and seconded by Stancer. And we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny, aye.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, aye.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
Mr. Stammel?
Stammel, aye.
Ms. Stancer?
Stancer, aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Sullivan, aye.
And McDonald, aye. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Next up, we have the proposed contract from the Ufcw Union, which is our union representing our food workers. And that proposed contract is in the packet also. Dr. Morris or Mr. Harrington, I think you were a rep on this. Is that correct? Do either of you want to introduce this?
I think all I'll say is that this I think it's a kind of fiscally sound extension, but it also really acknowledges and honors the work that our food service workers did last year. When we were remote, they were everywhere. They were coming in, they were making meals. They served over 100,000 meals during the pandemic when we were not in school. They were in our communities preparing it, and they made sure lots of people got fed, which, I think of Maslow's hierarchy of need. It's way up there. And so I think it's solved some language things that we needed to, that Mr. Harrington, Ms. Cunningham, and others who were involved needed to solve that were of mutual benefit. But I think it's fair for the district and also fair for the employees. I don't know if Mr. Harrington, this was ratified by the membership as well, I should note. If there's anything Mr. Harrington would like to add to that.
Yeah. I was gonna say so I guess like the striking thing is kind of like their level of commitment during this whole pandemic and the fact that they pretty much didn't shy away. Also, it was I don't know, it was very important. Like I believe in the idea of paying people what they're worth, that sort of thing. And I think this got us a lot closer than we've been in the past. I know that the pending minimum wage was a factor, but also just their level of commitment and actually kind of making them whole on like the essential worker pay, that sort of thing. it felt like the right thing to do. And I also want to credit them with being so not just easy to work with, but thoughtful, about their whole process. And you can see that they really like care for each other. I kind of these days that's very important to me. So, but yeah, I think it's a good contract.
So I have a couple questions just for clarification because I was a little confused by this. It says it's for in the MOA for 2020-2021 school year. So is this document, is it a 1-year extension like we approved for another one of our bargaining unions, or is this a new contract altogether with what term of effectiveness? Because I couldn't find anywhere in this document that it stated sort of what dates this is valid for. Dr. Morris?
Yeah, it is a little confusing. So if you look at the very last page, page 3, article number 15, it is a multi-year contract. So while it does look backwards, it also looks forwards the next few years. But I know the way it's written is all the legalese, and it's not always easy to find everything on here. There's an addendum that is not on the public document that has, because it's not a large union, it has the individual salaries and the implications for every employee. We thought it wise not to put that out for the public. I mean, it is public information and we could request it, but we just felt like out of respect for the employees, because it had people's names attached, we did not do that. But that makes it a little easier to see how the salaries flow from year to year over the next few years. Mr. Harrington, is that consistent with what your understanding was as well?
Yep, absolutely. I just had to double check to make sure it was there on the 3rd page, but yeah.
And I guess one other question. So in Article 15, the budget that we approved for 2022-23 does cover this COLA.
Can you say that question one more time for the next fiscal year after this one?
Oh, sorry. 2021-22. It says new wage scale and placement for 21-22.
Yeah, we feel comfortable with where we are with that.
Okay.
Basically, yeah. Sorry, I thought you were asking about next year's budget.
Yes.
Yeah, I know it's not very long, right? As Margaret said before, we'll be having those conversations, but
yeah. Sorry. Okay. Ms. Spitzer.
Thanks. I'm very happy to hear that we've come to an agreement. I just have a question about Article 2, and I apologize if this was in point 2, Article 17 about holidays. I know whenever we're reviewing the calendar, we always say that we're taking Good Friday and 3 Kings Day as for budgetary reasons, because we have so many staff who are would normally take those days off because they're choosing to observe them personally. I guess I'm just asking, the language here makes it sound that they're holidays that we are taking, kind of like recognizing them in a way that's different from how we portray it, at least in that calendar and how it's been explained to me in the past. So I'm just wondering if this represents a change in additional contracts, or if this is unique to this one, and if so, just kind of get your thinking and the thinking from the district on why if we've made that change.
Yeah, and Mr. Harrington can certainly jump in, but some of this is because food service staff are hourly employees. So there's not work for them to do on days that we're not in school. That's different if there's someone is on a contract with a salary with a certain number of days in the year. So for hourly employees, if you have days where there's no kids in the building and we're not delineating them as holidays, it can lead to some contractual awkwardness as to what's happening on those days. So I think it's more just acknowledging that when students aren't in school for those days, as they haven't been and will continue not to be, certainly Juneteenth is a statewide holiday at this point, that everyone's clear on what the roles and responsibilities and for hourly employees, that stuff really matters. But Mr. Harrington, I don't know if you had more to add, because I didn't sit in on these negotiations. I just want to make sure that's consistent with your, again, understanding.
Yeah. That's very accurate. This basically brings them closer to the other unions that we employ here. And yeah, so basically the way it works is if they don't work, they don't get paid. And this adds to that, so they do get paid for those days.
Other questions, Mr. Demling?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Mr. Harrington for his work. A contract negotiation is a long slog of many hours. It's one of those key roles of the school committee member that that is almost invisible to the public, but is very essential. So I want to thank him for that. And also, he talked about being able to, pay our workers, a higher wage that we want to pay all our workers, a higher wage. I'm sure we could all double our employees' wages, and pay people, but we don't live in that idealized society yet. So, but nevertheless, that's a driving goal and a value of our committee. And it takes hard effort to get to a place where we can both fund our schools and make real progress on that for our employees. So I just really appreciate the work that Mr. Harrington did to achieve that goal.
Yes, I'll second the gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Other questions or a motion? You guys going to make me make the motion again? So I will move that we approve the contract with the Ufcw as presented.
Second.
Moved by McDonald, seconded by Harrington. Any further discussion? No, we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Demling.
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington.
Harrington, emphatically aye.
Ms. Kenny.
Kenny, aye.
Ms. Lord.
Lord, aye.
Ms. Spitzer.
Spitzer, aye.
Mr. Stammel.
Stammel, aye.
Ms. Stancer.
Stancer, aye.
Mr. Sullivan.
Sullivan, aye.
And McDonald, aye. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody. And next up is pooled testing update. Things moved very quickly since our last conversation. So we're actually getting an update on the actual rollout tonight. So
Yeah.
Dr. Morris.
So as we were doing, people were sharing appreciations. I definitely want to appreciate Robin Supernaut and our nurses who have been stalwarts of health and safety in our buildings. And Robin in particular has dealt with the trials and tribulations of multiple vendors or subcontractors for the vendor. And but the good news is we did pool testing today. We're at the high school. There's one other district that had pool testing happen, but as it's a regional meeting, I'll just speak to that. We had less bumps than we thought. There were bumps, but there less bumps than we thought. We had staff members come in between 8 and 9 before students arrived for their pool testing, and students came during a period who had signed up. I heard a little buzz that more students will sign up now that they know it's actually happening. Hopefully that comes to fruition. But we had the subcontractor came with sufficient staff. They delivered supplies yesterday. They did all the prep yesterday. And for first time of pool testing, that was a really good thing. We did, based on the feedback and the conversations we had last time, we did not need to access other folks like the National Guard. The subcontractor was able to staff the school with enough folks to be able to make it work. And I think it was one of the challenges of pool testing at every school is it is minimally disruptive, right? And I don't mean that as a good or bad thing. It's an accurate statement. If students are leaving class to go to the nurse or another area and do a swab and then make sure it goes in the right place, that's not a huge amount of time, but it's disruptive to have students leave class to do that. And that's true everywhere. The cost benefit of having testing done is worth it for many, many folks, both staff and students in our schools. And I think based on what we were anticipating, today was more successful than sort of we were bracing ourselves for that way. I don't know if Ms. Kane, I don't want to put you on the spot, and I'm not suggesting you have to talk from your own personal experience, but the level of disruption in the school today, I don't know how you would rate that, if you don't mind me asking.
I mean, it was like someone left my Spanish class. I mean, I didn't even know it was happening. So
Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, that's good that it was mild that way. You know, at the high school, it's a little bit easier because students can be more independent. If they've signed up, they were notified it was happening, and PA announcement. At the elementary level, there's a lot more. And again, that's sort of in between. They're not quite as independent as high schoolers to be able to know to come down. I think it is worth noting that even if families have signed up their children, if children decide not to go or they don't want to be tested, we do not force students to test. It's not a disciplinary situation. There has to be oral consent on the part of the student, along with the written consent by the family. There's no penalties. They're not docked, credits on their grades. We will be notifying families of students who decided and opted not to participate. But that's the nature of this thing. It's an optional program. No one's forced to do it.
I guess two just questions for myself and also just for the public. I want to just reiterate that I believe this is all going to be covered by the state in terms of the budgetary implications of the full testing. And then just wanted to clarify, how quickly will people be notified if there's a case? Like, is it same day turnaround? Is it the next day? Is it 48 hours? And then do you think, will there be any additional outreach to spread the word that this is happening? I mean, I think word of mouth will start spreading it a little bit, but it sounded like from last time we talked, it was fairly lower than I would have anticipated participation based on, we've actually received quite a bit of public comment kind of strongly in favor of rolling out pool testing. And I feel like it's really been out there in the press. So I was a little surprised by the level of participation that you were discussing at the last meeting.
Right. So on the first question, yeah, there's no direct cost. It is, we do have staff members' time and resources that go towards it, but there's no direct cost of any of the materials of the testing. On the second question, we did see, we put in the newsletter again with the dates and saying it was really happening this week, and we did see a bit of a bump of participation. What anecdotally we're hearing, or I'm hearing, is two reasons why our participation isn't higher. One, the expanded UMass program is really, really easy. Most communities don't have the ability to take a bunch of swabs, drop them off at the Bang Center or, at UMass. There's a number of our families who are employed at UMass, and it's just for them not having to do it at school, not having to have any disruption, and doing an individual PCR has been the preference we've heard from some folks. So I think that's one. I think there's still some people as well, who have indicated, I'm trying to think how to say this accurately. The nature of being in a pool is a little uncomfortable, that they know if the pool's positive, the pool's generally about 10 people, then they get, have to do the PCR test, or the Binex test, and, the anxiety that would cause. So there's some people who are just bridge to process all the information and then come back to us. So that's the turnaround time. Very similar to frankly, the stuff that you would do around here with UMass or CBS or whatever.
Other questions? Mr. Demling?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I agree with Dr. Morris that there's no need to rehash the National Guard aspect of this, but before we completely leave this, I did want to say I appreciated the way that the committee approached it last time. It's a topic that came on the agenda really last minute. Public didn't have an opportunity to comment on it or provide its input in any way. We had I thought a really good nuanced discussion of different points of view. And then we decided to, pause for a week or two in order to get clarity on some points that were raised and to give the public an opportunity for input. It turns out that the issue was solved for us by the vendor's availability, but I thought it was a good example of how the committee collaborates and different people being able to share different points of view that aren't immediately resolvable, but we work through with the shared goal of what's best for our staff and students, and I just appreciated the tenor of that conversation.
Dr. Morris just commented that Amherst Media is having some technical buffering issues right now and asked us to pause. So should we take maybe a 5-minute break? Are folks okay with that? Okay. So it is, I'm looking for my clock, 7:43. So we'll come back at 7:48. Seeing none. Okay, great. So next up is subcommittee assignments. I included our current spreadsheet there. The reason why we put this on is a couple things. So I referenced the policy subcommittee meeting a week ago. Our numbers, so our current membership is Mr. Sullivan, Ms. Spitzer, myself, and Ms. Westmoreland from the sort of representing the superintendent and the district in that committee. We used to have additional members, and we used to have a member from Pelham, and never replaced her when she left the regional committee. Because Ms. Spitzer is not running for re-election, we're definitely losing one member, and depending on the results of the election next week, we may be losing two. But we need, so we, as the policy subcommittee, talked about wanting to bring in any potential new members now, so that the work can continue, so that any new member could sort of get up to speed before Ms. Spitzer leaves. So that's one topic, adding this to the agenda. The other one is we just ratified the Ufcw contract. There are contract negotiations are also beginning with the AFSCME, and they had to get started already. And Ms. Lord has generously sat in on those initially, but we need to officially appoint a rep, to a member to represent us in those negotiations. So those are the two sort of reasons why we added that to the agenda. If there's any other committee memberships that folks want, I know that Mr. Stammel raised his hand to join the evaluation subcommittee, which is another one that Ms. Spitzer has been on, and so definitely losing a member there. But correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the evaluation subcommittee kicks into gear in the spring, not quite yet. Ms. Spitzer?
Yeah, I think it does. I don't know if there's any advantage, since I've been the chair of that and kind of spearheading the work over the last 2 years with Mr. Sullivan too. So if Mr. Sullivan feels like he can carry the torch, I'm happy to not worry about it. But just that if there was any desire to have any overlap in order to bring somebody else on to kind of explain the process and share knowledge, I'm happy to bring somebody on if they're eager to do so before the end of December.
So I'll let you three sort of just talk about that offline. One thing we learned from experience, I don't know, it's like until we appoint a chair, if we don't have a chair, then the evaluation subcommittee can't meet because the chair calls the meeting. So that may be one thing that that can be tackled actually when we reorganize in January. So let's start first with the AFSCME. As mentioned, they had to get those bargaining, had to get started already. So Ms. Lord has been stepping in, but we need to officially appoint our regional school committee member to represent us in those negotiations. Any objections to Ms. Lord continuing, or is there somebody else who would like to join her? Ms. Lord, are you open to continuing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so appointed. Then, thank you so much, because as Mr. Demling stated in talking to Mr. Harrington, that is a significant workload that happens behind the scenes, and only when we're ratifying new contracts do we see that work, the fruits of that work. So thank you very much. And then on the policy subcommittee, do we have any volunteers to join that intrepid group? Mr. Demling?
Well, I only ever join intrepid groups, so that sounds like a good one for me. So yeah, I'm happy to replace Ms. Spitzer on that group.
Awesome. And it is, I will say that committee meets once a month. We meet for 1 hour, and we're pretty strict on that 1 hour. So when it gets to the close to the end of that 1 hour, we divvy up any independent any work that might have to happen, and it isn't. I would say it's probably less of a time commitment than bargaining reps. So, great. Any other? And again, because of the Amherst elections, we're going to be reorganizing in January at that first meeting in January. So that will be the time that we'll sort of officially set up our subcommittee memberships. Okay, great. Moving on to our next item. So the policy subcommittee is looking for work. One of our policies on policies actually states that we need to review our policy manual every year or every 2 years, which is not humanly possible given the number of policies that we have. So the policy subcommittee takes it there's a spreadsheet that's linked for the public doesn't have access to that, but the school committee members do have access to that as a view-only document, which is just a quick spreadsheet giving an overview of all of the policies and the years that they were made effect, either updated or created. And so going through that, the policy subcommittee sort of came up with a proposal of some suggestions of policies that we would review for possible update in this coming year. So we're not, the policy subcommittee, Mr. Demling, don't worry, we're not doing all 200 of these policies this year. So the policy subcommittee talked about prioritizing potentially ones, going from the oldest to starting with the oldest. As you'll see, there's some that are over 20 years old or even 30 years old. Those are the oldest ones are highlighted. Any policy that hasn't been updated or reviewed since 2000, so in the last 21 years, is highlighted in yellow. The policies that the subcommittee is suggesting looking at are, sorry, I'm trying to scroll. There you go. The highlighting changed. Oh, sorry. Administrative structure and filling administrative vacancies, which are policies CC and CI. Those are ones that are very old, and particularly the filling administrative vacancies is one that actually is no longer valid because of ed reform. So the school committee does not appoint any staff other than the superintendent and does not have authority on any other administrative roles within the district. And so that one does, it's sort of just, I don't know what to say. It's not really enforced right now because it doesn't, ed reform has changed it and made it sort of invalid. So that's one that we are proposing the policy subcommittee work on to either come back to the school committee, the full committee, with a recommendation of whether to remove it or to update it according to incorporate some of the search systems and approaches that the district actually is using in filling administrative vacancies. And I think administrative structure was another one that sort of is related to that we had proposed that the policy subcommittee take a look at. The other one was they're highlighted. Actually, no, those are not ones that we're recommending. Any thoughts? Ms. Spitzer, do you want to add anything on that? I can't remember if I captured everything.
That's a good summary.
And just so folks know, if you want to look at we're using board docs for the policy subcommittee, so that as minutes get approved, they will show up there. So if anybody's curious as to what sort of the policy subcommittee has talked about, it's there. Mr. Demling?
Since we're on this 90,000 foot level discussion of our policies, when you brought up ed reform, it prompted a thought, because ed reform was like 93, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So that's like, I'm just trying to do the math, a long time ago. So and I do know that MASC, the Mass Association of School Committees, has like kind of a boilerplate like templates that they offer to districts of like, okay, well, here's a starting point for y'all to discuss. I'm wondering if that might be a good idea. I'm not trying to overload the next hour that I'm in a policy subcommittee meeting, but just generally speaking, if we're looking at this big picture, if there aren't maybe some efficiencies that we could accomplish there, as opposed to trying to take stuff that was written 30 years ago and ourselves, updating it into modern stuff. Because I'm sure that the current template that they have takes into account not only just ed reform, but all the other stuff that's happened since then. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That's there's a really helpful model policy manual on the MASC website that is super helpful, and you're absolutely right, is a great way for us to sort of efficiently update our policies. Ms. Spitzer, did you have some?
I was just going to say that's been our practice, is to go to the MASC and look at their policies. So, right on. I'll be right at home.
So are folks okay with that approach? Great. And then as we work through them, if there's any others that that the policy subcommittee would like to suggest that we update, we'll bring those also to the full committee. Great. And moving right along, future agenda planning. And again, for the committee members, you have access to our document in there. And Mr. Demling noted that not everybody had access, so I gave everybody on the regional school committee now should have view access to that document in case you want it. But our next meeting is the 9th of November. And we'll be going through, as Ms. Stancer mentioned before, that's going to be a big budget meeting. So we'll be looking at the review of the fourth quarter of last fiscal year 21, and looking at how we ended the year. Fiscal year 22 first quarter budget update, as well as rural schools grant. And then we'll be talking about more in depth about the FY23 process and timeline, and reviewing some of the materials that the budget subcommittee and Dr. Slaughter's team have been working on, the FAQ, and sort of talking about, I guess, fixing those dates for that, for the Four Towns meeting and the forums. We'll also be looking again at the 22-23 calendar, and potentially voting on that. And then the hearing an update on the NEASC accreditation at that one. That one I'm not quite sure if that's confirmed yet, but that's one that we kept placing on the agenda. The other one, question we put tentatively, do we want to have a conversation about publishing draft school committee minutes? That was, I think, suggested 2 weeks ago that we talk about that. Ms. Stancer?
Just a quick question. What are we doing now about minutes? Are we publishing the drafts, or are we waiting until they're approved?
Well, right now, since we moved to board docs, what happens is they're not published until they're approved. And then when they're published, they're attached on that meeting. So when you go to that meeting, on that first, you'll see, but you don't even have to go into the agenda at that point. You can just click on the minutes. You have the option to go into see what the agenda was and see the minutes all in that one spot. Until that point, only those of us that have a login from the committee or the district administration can see the draft minutes. Our past practice, because we didn't have this fancy website tool and we had paper packets, the minutes, were printed and included in the packet, the drafts. So sorry, that was a little bit of agenda creep there, but just to explain why we're talking about that, because it is a change since we moved to this board docs. Any questions? It'll be a full meeting. So, Mr. Deming?
So not for that full meeting, but maybe for the December meeting. We talked earlier in this meeting about perhaps getting a presentation on the well-being programming that Dr. Morris was updating us on earlier.
Yeah, the Happiness Project.
Is that what it's called? Oh, cool. So yeah, that.
Thank you. Ms. Spitzer? You're muted.
Sorry, I just see that the Happiness Project is also listed on the 21st. So, and I see you're adding it to the 7th.
The 21st. Oh, of December. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. I'm guessing that that was intentional. So I'll take it off of that December meeting. Ms. Lord.
Would there be room to make a presentation about a land agreement or acknowledgement?
On the 7th, December 7th?
Oh, yes. Or if it's too crowded, we can.
But December 7th is.
Thank you.
Anything else? Ms. Lord, if anything drops off of the November meeting, would you be, we can, I'll let you know in case you want to move it up to the 9th. Okay. Great. Okay. So moving on, warrant report. Ms. Spitzer.
So I just want to point out that on board docs, 2 of those warrants were for the Amherst School Committee. So I'm assuming that's an error. And then I had one that I had signed that actually wasn't included here. So the warrants that are included in the executive content don't necessarily match the ones that I'm going to be reading off, and that's the reason. All right, here we go. I, Carrie Spitzer, authorized by my signature to payables in the amount of $411,118.17 for the warrant dated October 15th, 2021. This included general fund expenses of $330,219.55, revolving fund expenses of $37,932.96, and grant fund expenses of $42,284.11, and other funds in the amount of $595.98 for gifts and $85.57 for capital. And this was signed by me on October 21st, 2021. Just gonna finish. So I, Carrie Spitzer, authorized by my signature to payables in the amount of $651,761.56 for the warrant dated October 22nd, 2021. And I'm realizing there's no breakdown of those costs included in the write-up, but it's general fund expenses according to the, excuse me, the signature form was partially filled out. That entire amount was for general fund expenses. And I signed it on October 25th, 2021. Thank you.
Sorry, I had to move my cursor. Thank you. Next, we have gifts, and we do have, looks like some. I will move that that we accept the following gifts from Joe Weinar to support Amherst-Pelham School District U.S. flag from U.S. Naval ship Joy Weinar was stationed on, which sailed Atlantic Ocean, Arabian Gulf, England, South Africa, and Spain, estimated value of $100. And from Reader to Reader, Inc. to support the Family Center, 58 coats for students in need, estimated value of $4,000. Is there a second?
Lord, second.
Moved by McDonald, seconded by Lord, and we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny, I.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, I.
Ms. Spitzer?
Ms. Spitzer abstain.
Mr. Stammel?
Stammel, aye.
Ms. Dancer?
Stanser, aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Sullivan, aye.
And McDonald, aye. The motion passes 8 yes and 1 abstention.
There was no chance for discussion. Can I just explain my abstention? Is that I'm worried about a conflict of interest because my father is the executive director of Reader to Reader.
I believe you can state that when you abstain. But great. If there is nothing else, then I will make another motion. I move that the committee will consider move into executive session in accordance with the open meeting law, MGLC 30A, section 21A, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares, and I declare, and for the purpose of approving minutes with no intention of returning to open session. Is there a second?
Stammel, second.
Moved by McDonald, seconded by Stammel, and we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny, I.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, I.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
Mr. Stammel?
Stammel, aye.
Ms. Stancer?
Stanser, aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Sullivan, aye.
And McDonald, aye. So we'll move into executive session now.